The waiting area of Transit Station Gamma 7 was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Hundreds of different species moved through the massive hall, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation in dozens of languages. The universal translators embedded in the walls worked hard to make sense of it all. Outside the tall windows, stars stretched across the darkness of space like scattered diamonds. Valera sat alone on a bench designed to accommodate multiple body types. The metal was cold beneath her, but she barely noticed anymore. She had learned long ago not to expect comfort in public spaces. Her rough, stone-like skin caught the harsh artificial light, making the uneven texture more visible. Her face, with features that didn't quite line up the way most species preferred, remained expressionless. She had practiced that look for years. Around her, the bench stayed empty, completely empty. Even though every other seating area in the waiting hall was packed with travelers, the spaces on either side of Valera remained untouched. It was always this way. A family of Alvorians walked past, their silver skin gleaming and their movements graceful. The mother glanced at the empty seat next to Valera, then quickly looked away. She guided her children toward a more crowded area instead, preferring to stand rather than sit near the Thyssian woman. Valera pulled her travel documents closer to her chest. The datapad felt warm in her hands. She focused on the screen, pretending to read the information about the upcoming Galactic Council Summit. She had read the same page 17 times already. 2 Melon diplomats approached the seating area. The Melon were known throughout the galaxy for their patience and tolerance. Their philosophy centered on acceptance and understanding. They spoke often about the importance of looking beyond surface differences. But when they saw Valera sitting there, they exchanged a quick look. Without a word, they moved to another section of the waiting area. The rejection didn't hurt anymore. Valera told herself this every time it happened. Pain required surprise, and there was no surprise left in her. This was simply how the galaxy worked. Beauty standards existed, and the Thyssian species had lost that particular genetic lottery. Their thick protective skin that helped them survive on their harsh home world meant nothing here. Their asymmetrical features that came from adapting to extreme radiation exposure only made other species uncomfortable. She checked the departure board again. 2 more hours until the shuttle to the council world would leave. 2 more hours of sitting alone in a crowded room. Across the hall, Kira stood with the Earth delegation. She was of average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. Her diplomatic uniform was clean but not fancy. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of service. As the others in her group discussed their strategy for the summit, Kira found her attention drifting. She noticed the Thyssian woman sitting alone. More specifically, she noticed the empty space around her. Kira had seen this pattern before in her travels. Different species, different stations, but always the same invisible barrier that some beings carried with them. The preliminary meetings will be crucial, said Minho, the head of Earth's delegation. He was reviewing documents on his datapad, his voice serious. We need to establish our position early. Kira nodded, but her eyes stayed on the lonely figure across the hall. The seating area where the human delegation had gathered was becoming uncomfortably crowded. More diplomats kept arriving as departure time approached. A Karathi official bumped into Kira for the 3rd time, apologizing in his species' elaborate way. 3 more humans from Earth's security detail had just arrived, looking for places to sit. Kira made her decision quietly. She picked up her bag and her datapad. I'm going to find a better spot, she said to no one in particular. She walked across the hall with steady steps. Her boots made soft sounds on the polished floor. Other travelers moved around her in their complex dance of avoiding and approaching, of seeing and pretending not to see. Kira walked through all of it with her eyes straight ahead. When she reached the bench where Valera sat, she didn't pause. She didn't ask permission. She didn't offer an apologetic smile or a sympathetic word. She simply sat down in the empty space, leaving a respectful distance between herself and the Thyssian woman. Then she pulled out her datapad and began reading through the summit documents. Valera's entire body went rigid. She stopped breathing for a moment. Her eyes, which had been carefully focused on her own screen, flickered sideways. The human woman sat there calm and unbothered, scrolling through text on her device. This had to be a mistake. The human must not understand. Perhaps humans were new to galactic society and didn't know the unspoken rules yet. Valira waited for the realization to hit. She waited for the human to notice the texture of her skin, the irregularity of her features. She waited for the apologetic excuse and the quick retreat that would surely come. But Kira just kept reading. She shifted her bag to give Valira more room. She crossed her legs and settled in as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Around them, other species began to notice. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward the strange sight of a human sitting voluntarily next to a Thyssian. An Alvorian diplomat whispered something to her companion, her melodic voice carrying a note of confusion. A group of younger Karathi pointed discreetly, their faces showing surprise. Valira's hands trembled slightly. She gripped her datapad tighter to hide it. No one had willingly sat next to her in months, not since she had left her homeworld to take this position with the Thyssian diplomatic corps. The loneliness had become so normal that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone nearby. Kira turned a page on her datapad. She seemed completely absorbed in whatever she was reading. If she noticed the stares from other travelers, she gave no sign of it. If she noticed Valira's tension, she didn't react. She just existed there, sharing the bench, taking up her small portion of space in the universe. For the first time in a long time, Valira felt something shift inside her chest. It was small and fragile, barely there at all. It might have been hope, though she was afraid to name it. She kept her eyes on her screen and continued to pretend to read, but everything felt different now. The departure board updated. 1 hour and 45 minutes until boarding. Valira took a careful breath and allowed herself to relax just slightly into her seat. The human woman beside her turned another page and kept reading. Neither of them spoke, but somehow the silence felt less empty than before. Kira turned another page on her datapad, completely focused on the trade agreement she was reviewing. The numbers didn't look good. Earth would need to negotiate carefully at the summit to secure better terms for agricultural exports. She made a note in the margin with her stylus, then continued reading. Beside her, Valira remained perfectly still. The Thyssian woman had not moved in almost 15 minutes except to blink. Her breathing was so controlled it was barely visible. She had become an expert at making herself as small and unnoticeable as possible, even though her body took up the same amount of space as any other being. The departure announcements continued overhead. Ships were leaving for dozens of destinations across the galaxy. Each time a new gate number was called, crowds of travelers would shift and flow toward different areas of the station. But the bench where Kira and Valira sat remained an island of stillness in the chaos. A Karathi merchant walked past, pulling a hover cart loaded with sealed containers. He glanced at the two figures on the bench, did a double take, and nearly ran his cart into a support pillar. He recovered quickly and hurried away, looking back over his shoulder twice. Kira's datapad beeped softly. A message from Minho appeared on the screen, asking her to review the latest proposal from the Delvin Consortium. She opened the file and began reading, shifting her weight slightly to get more comfortable. As she moved, her bag started to slide off the bench. She caught it and moved it to her other side, which gave Valira another few inches of space. It was such a small thing, such a normal, thoughtless gesture of consideration, but Valira noticed. She always noticed every tiny interaction, every micro-expression, every shift in body language. When you spent your life being rejected, you became very good at reading the signs that rejection was coming, but this human woman showed none of those signs. No wrinkled nose, no slight lean away, no tension in the shoulders that suggested discomfort. Valira dared to glance sideways for just a moment. The human had dark eyes that moved quickly across her screen as she read. Her expression was neutral, maybe slightly tired. There was a small scar on her left hand, visible when she used the stylus. Everything about her seemed ordinary, unremarkable, focused on her own tasks. This confused Valira more than outright rejection would have. She understood rejection. It followed clear patterns. But this casual acceptance, this complete lack of reaction to her presence, was something she had no framework for understanding. Maybe humans couldn't see well. Maybe their visual processing worked differently than other species. Valera had heard that humans evolved under a yellow sun instead of the blue or white stars most species came from. Perhaps that changed how they perceived color and texture. Or maybe this particular human had no sense of smell. The Thyssian scent was not pleasant to most species. It was mineral and dusty like old stone. Valera was used to seeing beings wrinkle their noses or cover their breathing passages when they got too close. But the human just kept reading, occasionally making notes showing no signs of discomfort at all. More members of Earth's delegation began to notice where Kira had gone. Jinho, a tall man with broad shoulders who worked in security, spotted her across the hall. He picked up his travel case and walked over without hesitation. When he reached the bench, he nodded politely to both Kira and Valera. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the space on Valera's other side. Valera's eyes went wide. She managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. Jinho sat down with a heavy sigh. "My feet are killing me," he said to Kira. "How long have we been in this station?" "About 4 hours," Kira replied without looking up from her datapad. "You should have worn better boots. You sound like my sister," Jinho said with a slight smile. He pulled out his own device and started scrolling through security briefings. Now there were 2 humans sitting on either side of Valera. The bench that had been empty for hours now looked like any other seating area in the station, with travelers sitting close together while they waited. Except it wasn't like any other area because Valera sat in the middle, and these humans had chosen to be here. Across the hall, the whispers grew louder. An Alvorian diplomat stared openly, her beautiful face showing confusion. "Do they not know?" she asked her companion in their musical language. "Perhaps humans have different aesthetic processing," her companion suggested. "I've heard they come from a very diverse planet. But still, to sit so close." A group of 3 younger beings, delegates from various worlds attending their first summit, had gathered near a refreshment station. They kept glancing toward the bench where the humans and the Thyssian sat together. "Is that human female someone important?" one asked. "No, she's mid-level diplomatic staff according to the registry," another replied, checking his datapad. "Nothing special. Then why would she sit there?" None of them had an answer. Hana, another human from Earth's delegation, approached with 2 cups of something hot and steaming. She was younger than Kira, with sharp eyes and quick movements. She worked as a cultural attaché, helping to bridge the gaps between Earth's many societies and the even more diverse galactic community. "I brought you coffee," Hana said, handing 1 cup to Kira. "The real stuff, not that synthetic garbage they're serving at Gate 12. "You're a lifesaver," Kira said, accepting the cup gratefully. She took a sip and closed her eyes for a moment, appreciating the taste. Hana perched on the arm of the bench, balancing carefully. "So this is where everyone disappeared to. I should have known you'd find the quietest spot in the whole station." "It's not that quiet," Jinho said, jerking his thumb toward the crowded areas. "It's just less crowded than over there." Hana followed his gesture, then looked around at the empty space surrounding their bench. Yeah, I guess you're right. Plenty of room here." She pulled out her own datapad and balanced it on her knee while she drank from her own cup. Valera sat frozen between them all. 3 humans now, casually arranged around her like this was completely normal, like she was just another traveler waiting for a ship. Like her appearance meant nothing at all. The announcements overhead called out another departure. The crowd shifted again. More beings moved through the hall, and more of them noticed the strange grouping on the bench. Some pointed. Some whispered. Some simply stared, but the humans paid no attention to any of it. Kira finished reading her document and sent a reply to Minho. Jinho stretched his legs out in front of him and rolled his shoulders, working out the stiffness from too many hours of travel. Hana hummed softly to herself while scrolling through cultural briefing materials, and Valera, sitting among them, felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what to call it. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because anyone had made a speech about acceptance, not because anyone had offered her pity or sympathy, but because these humans had simply treated her like she was just another person waiting for a shuttle. Nothing more, nothing less. The departure board updated again. 30 minutes until boarding. Valera allowed herself to take a full, deep breath. Her hands, which had been gripping her datapad so tightly her knuckles ached, relaxed slightly. She was still afraid to hope, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But for right now, in this moment, she was not alone, and that was more than she had expected from this day. The diplomatic shuttle was much larger than standard transport vessels. It had been specifically designed to carry representatives from hundreds of different species to major galactic events. The interior was divided into sections, each one adjusted for different environmental needs. The temperature, humidity, and even gravity could be modified in each area to make passengers comfortable. Valera's assigned quarters were in the standard oxygen-breathing section, Level 3, Room 247. She pulled her single bag behind her as she walked down the corridor, checking the room numbers as she went. The hallway was busy with other delegates settling in. Most of them didn't look at her. A few saw her coming and suddenly found reasons to duck into their rooms early. Room 247 was small but functional. It had a sleeping platform that could adjust to different body types, a desk, and a small bathroom. A window showed the stars outside, though they looked strange and stretched because of the way the ship's engines bent space. Valera placed her bag on the desk and sat down on the sleeping platform. The material sensed her weight and adjusted automatically. She had 3 days before they reached the council world. 3 days on the ship with hundreds of other beings. 3 days of carefully timed trips to the dining area to avoid crowds. 3 days of keeping to her room as much as possible. A soft chime sounded from the door panel. Valera's whole body tensed. No one ever came to her door. She stood slowly and pressed the panel to make the door transparent. She could see out, but whoever was outside couldn't see in yet. It was a human, the same woman from the transit station, Kira. She stood in the corridor with her hands clasped in front of her, looking patient. Valera pressed the button to open the door. "Yes? Hello," Kira said. "I'm in room 245, just next door. I wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm Kira." "Valera," she replied quietly. "It's nice to meet you." Kira smiled, a small expression that didn't show teeth. "I wanted to let you know that Earth's delegation is hosting a small gathering in the observation lounge tonight, around 7 station time. Just casual conversation, nothing formal. You'd be welcome to join us if you'd like." Valera stared at her. "Why are you inviting me?" Kira looked slightly confused by the question. "Because we're inviting all the delegates on this level. It helps to meet people before the formal sessions start." She gestured down the hallway. "We've been going door to door. Have a good afternoon, Valera." She walked away before Valera could respond, moving to the next door down the corridor. Through the open doorway, Valera watched her knock and wait, then begin the same conversation with a Karathi diplomat who answered. Just inviting everyone on the level. It wasn't special. It wasn't about Valera specifically. It was just a normal thing that delegations did, apparently. Valera closed her door and leaned against it. Her hearts were beating too fast. She would not go to the gathering. That was the smart choice. She would stay in her room, as always, and avoid the awkwardness that would surely happen if she showed up somewhere she didn't belong. But at 7 station time, Valera found herself standing outside her door, having changed into a cleaner set of clothing. She told herself she was just going to walk past the observation lounge, just to see, just to observe. She didn't have to go inside. The observation lounge was a large room with windows that curved around 3 walls, showing the stretched starlight of faster-than-light travel. About 30 beings had gathered inside, holding drinks and talking in small groups. Most were human, but there were a few other species mixed in. The atmosphere was relaxed, with soft music playing in the background. Valera stood in the doorway, already regretting her decision to come. "Valera," Kira's voice called from across the room. She waved, gesturing for Valera to come in. "I'm glad you made it. Can I get you something to drink?" There was no escape now. Everyone had turned to look. Valera forced herself to walk into the room, her movements stiff. Water would be acceptable. "Coming right up." Kira moved to a table with various beverage dispensers. She returned with a glass of clear water and handed it to Valera. "Have you been to many council summits before?" "This is my 3rd, Valera said. "My 5th, Kira replied. "They all start to blur together after a while. Lots of meetings, not enough sleep, too much processed food." Jinho approached them, holding a cup of the same coffee he'd been drinking at the station. "Did you see they're serving Delvan cuisine in the main dining hall tonight?" "I've been looking forward to it since I saw the menu." "The spicy grain dish?" Kira asked. "That's the one. Your stomach is going to regret that decision. Kira said with a slight smile. Hana joined their small group, and suddenly Valera was standing in a circle of humans who were talking about food, about their rooms, about the route the ship was taking. They weren't talking about the summit yet. They weren't posturing or networking. They were just making conversation. "Valera, where's your homeworld?" Hana asked, pulling the Thyssian woman into the discussion. "Dice 7, in the Outer Rim," Valera answered carefully. "It's a high radiation world. Very harsh." "I've read about it," Hana said, her eyes brightening with interest. "Your people developed some incredible adaptive biology. The dermal plating that protects against radiation exposure is really unique. And your music traditions, the stone singing? I've always wanted to hear it in person," Valera blinked. "You know about stone singing?" "Of course. I'm a cultural attaché. It's literally my job to learn about different cultures." Hana pulled out her data pad and showed Valera a file. "I have recordings, but they say recordings can't capture the full resonance." "Is that true?" "Yes," Valera said slowly. "The vibrations move through stone and bone in ways that recording devices can't capture. It's meant to be felt as much as heard." "That's amazing," Hana said genuinely. "Do you sing?" "A little. Most Thesians learn the basics as children." The conversation continued, flowing naturally from one topic to another. Jinho talked about Earth's own musical traditions. Kira mentioned a concert she'd attended on a space station last year. The discussion broadened to include others nearby, and soon several beings were sharing stories about their favorite performances or cultural events. Valera found herself talking more than she had talked in months. No one interrupted her. No one turned away when she spoke. They asked questions and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. It was strange and uncomfortable and wonderful all at once. The mandatory dinner announcement came over the ship's communication system. The gathering began to break up as beings headed to the dining hall. Kira looked at Valera. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" Valera hesitated. This was pushing her luck. Sitting near someone in a transit station was one thing. A casual conversation at a gathering was another. But sitting together at a meal, where the interaction would be longer and more intimate, that was different. "The dining hall uses an algorithm to assign tables," Kira continued. "It tries to mix up species and delegations for diplomatic mingling. But we usually end up at adjacent tables anyway because we're all from Earth's group. You'd be welcome to join us." Valera started, then stopped. She wanted to say yes. She wanted it badly enough that it scared her. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Jinho said simply. "Come on. I want to try that Delvin dish before they run out." The dining hall was enormous, with sections divided by environmental needs. The oxygen-breathing area had dozens of tables arranged in clusters. True to Kira's word, the seating algorithm had placed Earth's delegation members near each other. Valera found herself at a table with Kira, Jinho, and Hana, along with 2 other humans she hadn't met yet. "This is Subin and Do-hyun," Kira said, introducing the others. "They're part of our technical support team." "Nice to meet you," Subin said with a friendly nod. He was younger than the others, with quick movements and an energetic manner. "First summit?" "Third," Valera said again. "Veteran then," Do-hyun said. He was older, with gray in his hair and a calm demeanor. "Any advice for us?" "This is our first one." Valera almost laughed at the absurdity of someone asking her for advice, but they looked at her expectantly, genuinely waiting for her response. "Bring comfortable shoes," she said finally. "The council chambers require a lot of walking between session rooms. See?" Do-hyun said to Subin, "I told you we should have packed better boots." The meal continued with easy conversation. The humans asked Valera questions about her work, about her home world, about her opinions on various galactic issues. They shared their own experiences in return. Jinho told a funny story about getting lost in a space station on his first diplomatic assignment. Hana complained about the terrible hotel rooms at the last summit she'd attended. Around them, other delegates had noticed. Valera could feel the stares, could sense the whispers, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't care. She was sitting at a table with beings who were treating her like she mattered, like her thoughts were worth hearing, like she was just another person sharing a meal. It was such a simple thing, so basic, so normal for everyone else in the galaxy, but for Valera it felt like a miracle. The second day aboard the diplomatic shuttle brought new tensions. Minho sat in his quarters reviewing reports when his communication console chimed with an incoming message marked as urgent. He opened it to find a formal request for a private meeting from Ambassador Telvoth of the Alvorian delegation. The meeting took place in one of the ship's neutral conference rooms. The Alvorians brought 3 representatives, all of them elegant beings with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. They moved with the natural grace their species was famous for throughout the galaxy. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice," Telvoth said, his voice carrying the melodic quality that made Alvorian speech pleasant to hear. "We wanted to discuss a delicate matter regarding your delegation's behavior." Minho folded his hands on the table. "I'm listening. Your staff members have been fraternizing with the Thyssian representative," Telvoth said carefully. "We understand that Earth is relatively new to galactic diplomatic circles, and perhaps certain protocols haven't been fully explained to your people." "What protocols are those?" Minho asked, his voice neutral. The Alvorians exchanged glances. Another one spoke, a female named Larson. "There are social norms that most species observe. These norms exist for good reasons. They maintain order and proper boundaries between delegations. The Thyssian delegate is known to be difficult to interact with." "Difficult in what way?" Minho asked. "Surely you've noticed," Telvoth said, avoiding the direct statement. "Her appearance is, well, not conducive to comfortable social interaction. Most delegations maintain appropriate distance. Your people seem to be unaware of these conventions." Minho leaned back in his chair. "Let me make sure I understand correctly. You're asking me to tell my staff to avoid sitting near or speaking with Delegate Velira because her species doesn't meet your aesthetic standards?" "It's not just our standards," Larson said quickly. "It's a widely held galactic norm. We're trying to help you avoid embarrassment. Other delegations are talking about Earth's unusual behavior." "Let them talk," Minho said simply. Telvoth's expression showed surprise. "Ambassador Minho, please understand. We're not trying to be difficult. We're offering friendly advice. Your delegation's reputation could suffer if you continue to disregard established social practices." "Our reputation will be just fine," Minho replied. "My staff are trained to treat all delegates with equal respect, regardless of their species or appearance." "That's not going to change." The Alvorian seemed unsure how to respond. After a moment, Telvoth spoke again, his tone more formal now. "We hope you won't regret this decision. The Council Summit requires building coalitions and maintaining good relationships. Making yourself unusual can impact your ability to achieve your diplomatic goals." "We'll take that risk," Minho said. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "Thank you for your concern, Ambassador." After the Alvorians left, Minho sat alone for several minutes. His communication console chimed again. This time it was a message from the Karathi delegation, then another from the Delvin Consortium, then 2 more from smaller delegations. All of them wanted to discuss Earth's unusual social behavior. Minho closed all the messages without responding. He pulled up his roster and sent a group message to his entire delegation. "Continue treating all delegates with equal respect and professionalism. Ignore any attempts to tell you otherwise." Down in the ship's library, Velira sat in a corner reading through briefing materials for the summit. The library was quiet, with only a few other beings scattered among the tables and reading alcoves. She had chosen a spot with her back to a wall, where she could see anyone approaching. She had been reading the same paragraph for 10 minutes without absorbing any of the words. Her mind kept drifting back to last night's dinner, to the conversation and laughter, to the strange feeling of being included. She knew it wouldn't last. Nothing good ever lasted for her. Soon the humans would realize their mistake, or someone would explain galactic social norms to them and everything would go back to the way it had always been. "There you are," Hana's voice called from across the library. Several beings looked up, annoyed at the noise. Hana didn't seem to notice. She walked over to Velira's table and sat down without asking permission. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Want to grab lunch?" Velira stared at her. "Lunch?" "Yeah, you know, that meal between breakfast and dinner." Hana grinned. "Come on, I want to try the Karathi station in the dining hall. Subin says their soup is amazing. I thought..." Velira hesitated. "I thought perhaps your delegation might have received some feedback about yesterday." "Oh, you mean the complaints?" Hana waved her hand dismissively. "Yeah, Minho told us about those. Apparently we're causing a scandal by sitting with you. Isn't that ridiculous?" Velira's heart sank. So it was over. The humans had been told, and now they would distance themselves like everyone else. It was almost a relief in a way. At least the waiting was over. Anyway, Hana continued, Minho told everyone to ignore it and keep doing what we're doing. So lunch? Valera's head snapped up. He told you to ignore it? Obviously. We're not going to let some outdated prejudices tell us who we can eat lunch with. Hana started packing up Valera's reading materials for her. Come on, I'm starving and you've been hiding in here long enough. As they walked to the dining hall together, Valera felt like she was moving through a dream. Other delegates saw them in the corridor and whispered. A group of Alvorians literally stepped aside to let them pass, their faces showing disapproval. Hana ignored all of it, chatting about the various food options available on the ship. In the dining hall, Kira and Jinho had already claimed a table. They waved when they saw Hana and Valera approaching. Dohyun and Subin arrived moments later, carrying trays loaded with different dishes they wanted to try. Okay, taste test time, Subin said, sitting down. I got samples from 5 different stations. We need to figure out which one has the best food for tomorrow's lunch. They spent the meal passing dishes around, commenting on flavors and textures. Jinho made a face when he tried the Delvan spicy grain dish that he'd wanted so badly the night before. I was warned, he admitted, drinking water quickly. A Karathi diplomat approached their table, his expression uncertain. He nodded politely to the group. Excuse me, I hope I'm not interrupting. Ambassador Minho, I wanted to speak with you about the mineral rights discussion scheduled for Day 2 of the summit. I'm not Ambassador Minho. Minho's voice came from behind the Karathi diplomat. The tall human had just entered the dining hall. But I'm happy to discuss it. Would you like to join us? The Karathi glanced at the table, saw Valera sitting there, and hesitated. Minho waited patiently, his expression friendly but firm. Finally, the Karathi sat down, choosing a seat at the far end of the table. The discussion about mineral rights began, with several members of Earth's delegation contributing ideas. Valera listened quietly at first, but when the conversation turned to radiation-rich mining environments, she spoke up. The Thyssian Consortium has extensive experience with high-radiation mineral extraction. Our techniques might be relevant to the proposal. The Karathi diplomat looked at her for the first time. You work in resource extraction? It's one of my areas of focus, yes, Valera said. Thys 7's environment required us to develop specialized methods. I didn't know that, the Karathi said. He pulled out his datapad. Would you be willing to share some information? This could significantly strengthen our proposal. Of course. The conversation shifted, becoming more technical and detailed. Other delegates passing through the dining hall noticed the discussion, and a few stopped to listen. One joined the table, then another. Within 20 minutes, what had started as a casual lunch had turned into an impromptu working session with representatives from 6 different delegations. Valera found herself at the center of it, explaining Thyssian mining techniques and answering questions. Her knowledge was detailed and practical, the result of years of study and experience that no one had ever bothered to ask about before. When the group finally dispersed, promising to continue the discussion at the summit, Valera sat back in her chair feeling dazed. Kira was still sitting next to her, finishing her meal. That was productive, Kira said casually. You really know your stuff. No one's ever asked before, Valera said quietly. Kira looked at her with surprise. Really? That seems like a waste. You clearly have valuable expertise. People don't usually see past. Valera gestured at herself. Their loss? Kira said simply. She stood and picked up her tray. See you at dinner? Valera nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched Kira leave, then looked around the dining hall. Several beings were still glancing in her direction, but the nature of those glances had changed somehow. There was less disgust and more curiosity now. A few looked thoughtful, like they were reconsidering something they had previously assumed. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was different from the blank rejection she had lived with for so long. And it had started because a group of humans had simply refused to follow rules that they thought were wrong. They hadn't made speeches or demanded change. They had just acted like she was worth sitting next to, and somehow that simple action had started to shift how others saw her. Valera picked up her own tray and left the dining hall. As she walked back the 3rd day on the ship, brought a cultural exchange event in the main assembly hall. It was designed to help delegates get to know each other before the formal summit began. Various species had set up displays showing art, music, technology, and cultural artifacts from their home worlds. The hall buzzed with conversation as beings moved from one exhibit to another. Earth's delegation had created a display featuring samples from several different human cultures. There were images of ancient architecture, recordings of music from different continents, examples of written language in various scripts, and even some food samples that could survive in multiple atmospheric conditions. Velera stood at the edge of the hall, watching from a distance. She had set up a small display for Thesis 7, showing some examples of stone-singing recordings and geological samples from her home world. No one had stopped to look at it yet, though several beings had walked past and glanced briefly before moving on. She watched as crowds gathered around the more popular displays. The Alvorians had created something elaborate and beautiful, with light sculptures that changed colors in response to movement. The Karathi exhibit featured complex mathematical patterns that represented their philosophical traditions. And the humans had attracted a decent crowd with their diversity of offerings. Hana stood at the Earth display, explaining something to a group of younger delegates. She caught sight of Velera across the hall and waved enthusiastically, gesturing for her to come over. Velera pretended not to see and turned to examine a nearby Delvan exhibit about agricultural techniques, but Hana was persistent. She excused herself from the group she'd been talking to and walked across the hall to where Velera stood. "Hey, why are you hiding over here? Come see our display properly." "I've already seen it," Velera said. "Yeah, but I wanted to show you something specific." Hana took Velera's arm gently and guided her toward the Earth exhibit. "See this section? It's about human musical diversity. We have samples from literally hundreds of different musical traditions, and they're all from just one planet. Isn't that wild?" Velera looked at the display with genuine interest. "Your planet must be very large." "Actually, Earth is pretty average in size," Hana said. "We just have a lot of different cultures packed into it. Different climates, different histories, different ways of seeing the world. It all led to incredible diversity." They listened to a few of the musical samples together. Some were rhythmic and energetic, others were soft and melodic. One featured instruments that Velera couldn't identify, creating sounds unlike anything she'd heard before. "This is beautiful," Velera said quietly. "Thanks. Wait until you hear your stone singing display. I went over there earlier and the recordings are amazing. You should really advertise it more. People would be interested if they knew what they were missing." Velera felt warmth spread through her chest. "You listened to the recordings?" "Of course I did. That's what these events are for." Hana looked at her curiously. "Velera, can I ask you something personal?" Velera tensed. "What is it?" "Why did you look so surprised when Kira sat next to you at the transit station?" The question hung in the air between them. Velera looked away, focusing on the musical display. "Most beings prefer not to sit near me. Because of how you look?" "Yes." Hana was quiet for a moment. "That must be really lonely." "I'm used to it," Velera said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That doesn't make it okay, though." Hana pulled out her datapad and pulled up some images. "Look, I want to show you something. These are all human beings, all from Earth." The images showed humans with dramatically different features, different skin colors ranging from very dark to very pale, different facial structures, different body types. Some had hair, some didn't. Some had features that seemed smooth and symmetrical. Others had distinctive characteristics that made them unique. "We look pretty different from each other, don't we?" Hana said. "And this is just a tiny sample. There are billions of humans and we're all different. Some people have features that their culture considers beautiful. Some don't. But we're all just people trying to live our lives." Velera studied the images carefully. She had known intellectually that humans were diverse, but seeing it displayed so clearly was different. "How does your society deal with these differences?" "Not always well, honestly," Hana admitted. "We have a long history of treating people badly because of how they look. Wars have been fought over it. People have been enslaved, killed, oppressed, all because of physical differences. It's one of the ugliest parts of our history. But you moved past it?" Hana laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "We're still working on it. But we learned some important lessons along the way. We learned that judging people based on their appearance is stupid and cruel. We learned that beauty standards are just cultural inventions, not universal truths. We learned that every person has value, regardless of what they look like. Is that why Kira sat next to me?" Valera asked. Because of these lessons? Kira sat next to you because there was an empty seat and she needed somewhere to sit, Hana said simply. She probably didn't think about it much at all. That's actually the point. To us, you're just another person. Your appearance is different from ours, but so what? Everyone's appearance is different from everyone else's. Valera felt her eyes burning with emotions she couldn't name. The rest of the galaxy doesn't see it that way. Yeah, we've noticed, Hana said dryly. It's weird, honestly. We knew there would be different species with different appearances when we joined the galactic community. We expected that. What we didn't expect was that everyone would have these rigid ideas about what looks good and what doesn't. Kira joined them at the display, holding a cup of something warm. Are we talking about galactic beauty standards again? Valera asked why we sat with her. Hana explained. Oh. Kira looked at Valera with those calm, thoughtful eyes. Do you want the complicated answer or the simple one? Both, Valera said. Simple answer. There was an empty seat and I needed to sit down. Kira took a sip from her cup. Complicated answer. Humans evolved with so much physical diversity that we had to develop broader definitions of what we consider acceptable. We can't afford to be rigid about appearance because we're all so different from each other. If we rejected everyone who looked different, we'd have no society at all. Also, Hana added, we've been reading science fiction about aliens for centuries before we actually met any. We've imagined every possible form that intelligent life might take. So when we finally got out here and met real aliens, nothing surprised us. Stone-like skin? Cool. Asymmetrical features? Interesting. We've imagined way stranger things in our stories. Subin approached the group looking excited. Hey, did you all see the Thyssian display? The stone singing recordings are incredible. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? I told you about it yesterday, Hana said. You mentioned it. You didn't tell me it was this cool. Subin looked at Valera. How does it work? The notes seem to resonate at frequencies I can barely hear. Valera found herself explaining the mechanics of stone singing, how Thyssian vocal cords could create vibrations that moved through solid materials. Subin listened with genuine fascination, asking technical questions about frequency ranges and resonance patterns. More humans from Earth's delegation gathered around, drawn by the conversation. Do-hyun asked about the geological aspects of Thais 7 that made stone singing possible. Jinho wanted to know if there were military applications for that kind of sonic technology. Kira asked about the cultural significance and how the tradition had developed over time. Valera answered their questions, growing more confident with each one. These humans weren't pretending to be interested. They weren't being polite. They genuinely wanted to know about her world, her culture, her expertise. They saw her as a source of knowledge and experience, not as an uncomfortable presence to be avoided. You know what this reminds me of, Do-hyun said after Valera had finished explaining a particularly complex aspect of harmonic resonance. There's a human culture on Earth, the Inuit people, who developed something similar with throat singing. Different mechanism, but the same idea of using the voice in ways that create unusual resonant effects. Really? Valera leaned forward with interest. I would like to hear recordings of that. I'll send you some files tonight, Do-hyun promised. The conversation continued, flowing naturally from topic to topic. Other delegates began to notice the animated discussion and stopped to listen. A few brave ones asked questions of their own. The Karathi diplomat from yesterday's lunch joined the group, bringing another delegate with him, who had expertise in sonic engineering. The cultural exchange event ended hours later with Valera's display having received more attention than she had ever dreamed possible. She stood among the humans as beings filed out of the hall, feeling exhausted but strangely energized at the same time. That was fun, Kira said, stretching her arms over her head. I learned a lot today. Thank you, Valera said quietly. For asking questions, for listening, for treating me like my knowledge matters. It does matter, Kira said, looking genuinely confused about why this needed to be said. You're an expert in your field. Why wouldn't we listen? Because most Bay the diplomatic shuttle arrived at the council world early in the morning, station time. The planet below was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green land masses with 3 small moons visible in the pale sky. It had been chosen as neutral ground centuries ago, modified to support hundreds of different species' environmental needs. The council complex sprawled across an entire continent. Massive buildings housed the various chambers, meeting rooms, and accommodation facilities. Transport systems moved delegates between locations. Gardens designed for different atmospheric conditions provided spaces for informal discussions. Everything was built on a scale meant to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and needs. Velira stood in the arrival terminal with her single bag, watching the organized chaos of hundreds of delegates disembarking. The Thyssian delegation's main group had arrived 2 days earlier on a different transport. She would need to check in with them and receive her assignments for the summit sessions. "Velira," Hana's voice called through the crowd. The young human pushed through a group of tall Karathi delegates, her smaller stature making her hard to spot. "Don't disappear on us yet. We're all heading to the orientation session together." "I need to meet with my delegation first," Velira said. "Right, of course. But after that you should come find us. The Thyssian quarters are in the same complex as Earth's, apparently." "Building 7, Level 9. Velira nodded and Hana rushed off to catch up with the rest of the human group. Velira made her way through the terminal to the transportation hub, following the signs to Building 12 where the Thyssian delegation was housed. The meeting with her own delegation was brief and uncomfortable. The lead diplomat, an older Thyssian named Krathvan, looked at her with disapproval. "We've heard reports about your behavior on the transport ship," he said without preamble, "associating closely with the human delegation, drawing attention to yourself." "I was simply being professional," Velira said carefully. "Professional would be maintaining appropriate distance and not making yourself the subject of gossip." Krathvan pulled up a schedule on his datapad. "You're assigned to the resource management sessions and the trade agreement discussions. Keep your focus on the work and stop creating unnecessary complications." Velira left the meeting feeling the familiar weight of shame settling on her shoulders. Her own people were embarrassed by her. The human's acceptance had made her forget for a moment that she was still the same person she had always been, the one who didn't quite fit anywhere. She made her way to Building 7 slowly, taking a longer route through the gardens to clear her head. Maybe she should maintain distance from the humans at the summit. They had been kind on the ship, but this was different. This was the actual summit, where real work needed to be done. She didn't want to be a burden or an embarrassment to them. The orientation session was already underway when she arrived at the designated hall. She slipped in quietly through a side door and found a seat near the back. The speaker was explaining the schedule for the next 2 weeks, the various sessions and their locations, the protocols for submitting proposals and amendments. A shadow fell across her seat. Velira looked up to find Kira sliding into the seat next to her. The human didn't say anything, just pulled out her datapad and started taking notes on the presentation. A few minutes later, Jinho appeared on her other side. Then Hana squeezed into the row behind them, leaning forward to whisper comments about the particularly boring parts of the presentation. Other delegates noticed, of course. Some of the whispers were audible even over the speaker's voice, but the humans ignored them completely, focused on the information being presented. After the orientation, the delegates broke into smaller groups for specific session assignments. Velira headed to the resource management meeting room, expecting to be alone among her assigned group. Instead, she found Dohyun already there along with several other delegates she didn't know. "Velira." Dohyun waved her over to a seat he'd saved. "Perfect timing. They're about to start the preliminary discussions on the mining rights proposal." The session focused on establishing guidelines for resource extraction in contested border regions. It was complex work, requiring careful negotiation between species with competing claims and different technological capabilities. Velira had prepared extensive notes on radiation-safe mining techniques that could be applied in several of the disputed areas. When the moderator opened the floor for input, Velira raised her hand. She was used to being ignored in these situations, so she was surprised when the moderator called on her immediately. "The Thyssian Consortium has developed protocols for high radiation environments that might be relevant," Velira began. Her voice was steady, professional. She presented her research clearly, highlighting how the techniques could reduce environmental damage while increasing efficiency. The room listened. Several delegates took notes. When she finished, a Karathi representative asked a follow-up question about implementation costs. A Delvan delegate wanted clarification on safety measures. The discussion continued, building on her initial contribution. Do-hyun added supporting data from Earth's own research on extreme environment extraction. Other delegates joined in, and soon the session had developed a working framework that incorporated elements from multiple proposals, with Velira's Thyssian techniques forming a central component. When the session ended 3 hours later, the moderator thanked all participants specifically, mentioning Velira by name as having made significant contributions. Several delegates approached her afterward, asking for copies of her research or suggesting follow-up meetings. Velira stood in the hallway outside the meeting room, her datapad clutched to her chest, feeling overwhelmed. This had never happened before. In her previous summits, she had attended sessions, submitted her reports dutifully, and been ignored. Her expertise had gone unnoticed, filed away in databases that no one read. That went well, Do-hyun said, coming up beside her. Your mining protocols are really innovative. I think they're going to form the basis for the final proposal. They listened to me, Velira said, still processing. Why wouldn't they? You clearly know what you're talking about. Do-hyun checked his schedule. I have another session in an hour, but do you want to grab something to eat first? I saw a dining area on level 3. They walked together through the council complex. Other delegates passed them in the corridors heading to various sessions and meetings. A few still stared at the sight of a human walking casually with a Thyssian, but many more simply nodded politely or ignored them entirely. The constant attention that Velira had drawn on the ship had started to fade into normality. In the dining area, they found Subin and several other delegates from the morning's orientation. The group had claimed a large table and was discussing the different sessions they'd attended. Velira and Do-hyun joined them, and the conversation flowed easily. A young Karathi aide, barely old enough to be attending his first summit, sat down hesitantly at the edge of the group. Excuse me, he said to Velira. I attended your session this morning. I'm writing a report for my delegation, and I wanted to ask about the dermal plating adaptations you mentioned. How did Thyssian evolution develop such specific radiation resistance? Velira explained the evolutionary biology, the environmental pressures on Thys 7, the way her species had adapted over millions of years. The young Karathi listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting with intelligent questions. Do-hyun joined the conversation, discussing how Earth had similar examples of extreme environment adaptation. Life finds ways to survive in the most unlikely places, he said. We have organisms on Earth that live in volcanic vents, frozen tundra, deep underground. Your people's adaptation is actually quite elegant from an evolutionary perspective. I never thought of it that way, Velira admitted. I've always been told our appearance was unfortunate. Unfortunate? The young Karathi looked confused. But it's fascinating. The way your dermis can absorb and dissipate radiation energy is incredible. I wish my species had something similar. We require extensive protective equipment for high radiation environments. The conversation expanded as others joined in, discussing various species' evolutionary adaptations and how they related to their home environments. Velira found herself at the center of an academic discussion, her knowledge valued and respected. Later that afternoon, Velira attended a trade agreement session. The room was packed with representatives from dozens of worlds, all arguing about tariffs and trade routes and market access. It was the kind of session where voices tended to get loud and tempers ran short. When a particularly heated argument broke out between the Alvorian delegation and a coalition of smaller worlds, Velira surprised herself by speaking up. Perhaps a graduated tariff system based on planetary development index would address both concerns, she suggested. It would protect emerging economies while still allowing free trade between more established markets. The room fell silent. Ambassador Telvoth, the Alvorian who had complained to Minho about Earth's behavior on the ship, looked at her with surprise. That's actually a reasonable compromise, he said slowly, as if the words were difficult to say. The session moderator seized on the Galactic Council Summit entered its second week with tensions running high. Multiple proposals were deadlocked. Delegations had split into competing factions, and the moderators were struggling to keep discussions productive. The main issue was a disagreement about resource allocation in newly discovered systems. 3 major powers each claimed primary rights, and none were willing to compromise. Velira sat in the large assembly hall, listening to the same arguments being repeated for the 3rd day in a row. The Alvorians insisted on priority based on their technological superiority in deep space exploration. The Karathi Confederation argued for rights based on proximity to their established territories. The Delvan Consortium claimed historical precedent from ancient mapping data. None of them were wrong exactly, but none of them were completely right either. And while they argued, dozens of smaller delegations sat silently, knowing their own interest would be trampled by whatever the major powers eventually decided. "We're going in circles," Minho muttered to Kira, who sat beside him in Earth's delegation section. "Someone needs to break this deadlock." Kira glanced at Valera, who sat one row behind them with the Thyssian delegation. The human woman had a thoughtful expression on her face. She stood and made her way back to where Valera sat. "You're thinking something," Kira said quietly, sliding into an empty seat. "I can tell." Valera hesitated. "There might be a framework that addresses all three concerns, but it would require the major powers to accept limitations on their authority. They're not going to accept limitations willingly." "No," Valera agreed, "but the smaller delegations might push for it if they see it as their best option for fair representation." Kira smiled. "You should propose it." "Me?" Valera's eyes widened. "I'm not authorized to make major proposals. Krathvin would need to present it, then convince him, or present it yourself as an individual contribution. The rules allow for that." Kira stood. "Talk to some of the smaller delegations first. Build support. If you have enough backing, the major powers will have to listen." The assembly broke for lunch, and Valera spent the time moving between tables in the dining area. She spoke with representatives from smaller worlds, explaining her idea for a tiered access system that would guarantee representation for all parties while still acknowledging the major powers' investments and capabilities. The response was cautiously positive. By the time the afternoon session began, Valera had commitments from 12 smaller delegations to support her proposal if she presented it. Her hearts were beating too fast as she stood and requested recognition from the moderator. The assembly hall grew quiet. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Valera felt her legs shaking, but she kept her voice steady as she began to speak. "Honored delegates, I would like to propose a framework for resource allocation that addresses the concerns raised by all parties." She pulled up her presentation on the central display screens, showing diagrams and data. "This system establishes primary, secondary, and tertiary access rights based on multiple criteria, including technological investment, territorial proximity, and historical precedent. But it also guarantees representation and access for smaller delegations through a rotating council system." She walked through the details, explaining how each major power would maintain significant advantages, while smaller worlds gained protections and opportunities they currently lacked. The system included provisions for shared research, profit distribution based on contribution levels, and dispute resolution mechanisms. When she finished, the hall was silent for a long moment. Then questions began. Ambassador Telvoth asked about implementation costs. A Karathi representative wanted clarification on the territorial proximity calculations. A Delvan administrator questioned the historical precedent methodology. Valera answered each question calmly, her preparation showing. She had anticipated most of the concerns and had data ready to address them. When she didn't have an answer, she acknowledged it honestly and promised to provide additional information. The discussion continued for over an hour. Other delegates began contributing ideas suggesting modifications and improvements. Earth's delegation added technical specifications for the monitoring systems. A coalition of mid-sized powers proposed amendments to the access tiers. Slowly, the framework evolved from Valera's initial proposal into something that began to look like it might actually work. "This is remarkable," the session moderator said finally. "Delegate Valera, would you be willing to chair a working group to refine this proposal for formal consideration?" Valera looked at Krathvin, her delegation's leader. He looked stunned, but he nodded slowly. "The Thyssian Consortium would be honored to lead this effort," he said, his voice formal. The working group formed over the next 2 days. Valera found herself at the center of complex negotiations between powers that normally wouldn't speak to each other directly. She mediated disputes, found compromises, and kept the discussions moving forward. The humans supported her work with technical expertise and diplomatic backing, but they let her take the lead. Hana helped her prepare presentations. Do-hyun provided data analysis. Jinho made sure she had secure communication channels for sensitive negotiations. Subin created visual aids that made the complex proposal easier to understand, and Kira simply sat in on meetings, offering quiet advice when asked and saying nothing when not needed. The work was exhausting. Valera spent 16 hours a day in sessions, meetings, and private discussions. She barely slept. She forgot to eat until someone would bring her food. But she was doing work that mattered, using her knowledge and skills in ways she had never imagined possible. On the summit's final day, the Assembly voted on the resource allocation framework. It passed with overwhelming support from smaller delegations and grudging acceptance from the major powers. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair, and it opened doors for future cooperation that had been closed before. As delegates filed out of the final session, many stopped to speak with Valera. Some thanked her for her work. Others asked about future collaboration on related issues. A few simply nodded in respect, acknowledging what she had accomplished. Krathvin approached her as she was packing up her materials. "You did well," he said stiffly. "The Thyssian Consortium has received significant recognition for your work here. You've brought honor to our people." It was the closest thing to praise she had ever received from him. Valera nodded, too tired to process the emotions his words stirred up. That evening, Earth's delegation hosted a final gathering to celebrate the summit's conclusion. The lounge was packed with delegates from dozens of worlds, the atmosphere relaxed and cheerful after 2 weeks of intense negotiations. Music played softly in the background and the smell of various foods filled the air. Valera stood near the windows again, her usual spot. But this time she wasn't standing alone and watching from the outside. She was simply taking a moment to herself, processing everything that had happened. Kira joined her, carrying 2 glasses of something that sparkled. She handed one to Valera. "You should be proud of what you accomplished." "I'm still processing it," Valera admitted. She took a sip of the drink. It was sweet and fizzy, pleasant on her tongue. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting alone in a transit station waiting for a ship. Now I've helped broker a major agreement that will affect resource allocation across dozens of systems. "You always had the capability," Kira said. "The circumstances just finally allowed you to use it." Valera looked at her. "You changed those circumstances. You and the rest of your delegation. If you hadn't sat next to me that day, none of this would have happened." "We just gave you a chance to be seen," Kira said. "You did the rest yourself. Your knowledge, your skills, your ability to find compromises, that was all you." "But without that initial chance," Valera trailed off. "Why did you do it, really? I've been wondering this whole time. There must be a reason." Kira was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lights of the council complex. "Honestly, I didn't think about it at all. I saw an empty seat. I needed to sit down, so I sat. It wasn't a political statement. It wasn't charity. It wasn't me trying to prove something. I just sat down. It can't be that simple." "But it is," Kira said, turning to face her. "That's the whole point. To us, treating you with basic respect is simple. It's the default setting. The fact that everyone else makes it complicated. That they create all these rules about who deserves dignity and who doesn't based on appearance. That's the strange part to us. Most of the galaxy doesn't see it that way. Most of the galaxy is missing out then." Kira took a sip of her drink. "You know what I think? I think the galaxy's beauty standards are a convenient excuse for maintaining power structures. If you can decide who's acceptable and who isn't based on subjective aesthetic judgments, you can control who gets access to opportunities. You can keep certain groups on the outside without having to justify it with logic or evidence." Valera had never considered it from that angle. "You think it's deliberate?" "Not always consciously. But systems of exclusion serve the people who benefit from them. Why would they question something that keeps them comfortable and privileged?" Kira gestured to the gathering around them. "Look at what happened here.